Hey everyone, today we're going to put the Raptor suspension on the Raptor, and I'm going to walk you through the general process on how I did it and any complications I had. And then at the end I'm going to give you a price breakdown on how much it cost me. So let's do it, and hopefully you find this helpful. Alright, it's time to get started on this front suspension, and the first thing I'm going to do is the tie rods. And the reason I'm doing this first is because that allows me the easiest way to tighten the tie rod onto the steering rack. And that's just so I can get a wrench in there and have everything out of my way. And the tie rod, while sitting up there, doesn't really get in the way too much with everything else. But I did kind of have a surprise when I did the passenger side. And it's not a big deal, just kind of annoying. But so the Raptor uses a different steering rack than this F-150. So as you can see, the boot diameter, it might be a little tough to tell. The boot diameters are different. So on the Raptor one, this long one, obviously, the boot is a much smaller diameter up here, so it doesn't fit on the rack. So what you have to do is basically disassemble both tie rods here and swap the boots. Really not a big deal. It's a pretty easy process, but I highly recommend you soak this for a long time. On the passenger side, I had to soak it and use heat to get it undone. And this is my F-151. Truck has 90,000 miles on it, and it's almost 10 years old at this point. So very much stuck on there. The Raptor one, according to the previous owner of this equipment, has a lot less miles, and that came off pretty easy. So I'm going to do that and show you how it looks. All right, so the tie rod's all in place. I got the boot slid over. Just make sure you use the same clamp that was with the original boot. It's the correct, I guess, width there. So the next thing is, got to replace the clamp that you originally cut off the tie rod, inner tie rod boot here. And I got a pack of these off Amazon, and they weren't that expensive. I'll put a link in the description. I don't even remember what they're called, but basically you slide these over, you adjust these little teeth into the correct holes to get nice and snug as you can. And then I was lucky enough to have this PEX tool that I use for, plumbing around the house, and it works perfectly because it just kind of squeezes the little rectangle there and cinches it down. So this might be a specialty tool you'll need, or maybe if you have the right set of pliers you can get by. But all in all, like, this is just something as a homeowner I like to have. And we'll get this on, and I'll tighten it up, and we'll keep the dust out. All right, with the tie rod in, I'm going to move on to the lower control arm. And as discussed in the previous video, I'll be using the SPC cam kit for lower control arm bolts there. And for this kit, the longer one, actually for any of the bolts that you use with this control arm, the longer one goes in front, the shorter one in the back over here. And one thing you want to pay attention to is you want to put the nut towards the outside. So on the rear mount towards the rear, on the front mount towards the front, because that's where you're going to be able to access and get your impact wrench on and tighten this up. In most cases with a nut and bolt, you can tighten from the bolt side. However, with this flat bolt in the cam system, you can't do that, or the whole thing would be flipping around and probably tearing up the kit here. So I'll show you how I initially set them up in the truck, and we'll keep rolling. All right, I'm in the front of the truck looking back, and as you can see, I got the cam kit in. And basically what I did is I basically turned the cam in a way that pushes the bolt as far in as possible. I read on some forums, a guy did a Mid-Perch mod, and I'll go over that when I installed the shock, but he did that, and he ended up having to push the bolt in as far as it could go, basically. So I figured that was a good starting point, and obviously the alignment shop can fine tune it from there. So one thing you'll notice when you do this kit is it's not as bad in the front as it is in the back, but it looks like these bolts are not long enough, which kind of concerned me at first. However, as you tighten this down, the ears, as you can see my torn glove there, the ears kind of suck in and collapse in on each other like this, they pinch. And so obviously that makes the bolt, longer relative to the width of the ears here of the mount. So like I said, I was a little concerned at first too, but I think it's gonna work out nicely. And I trust SPC. Everyone uses these kits, and I think they know what they're doing. So I'm gonna get these somewhat snug. I'm not gonna torque them down or anything. I'm actually gonna leave the torque down to the alignment shop, just because I know they're gonna have to do it, and my alignment shop is 2 minutes down the road, so not a big deal. So I'll get these kind of snugged up. I don't want to make them too tight because I want to be able to easily manipulate the lower control arm up and down as I complete the install. Okay, the next thing in the order of business is going to be the upper control arm, and this should be a pretty simple, straightforward one-for-one replacement. So I'm going to take those old grimy bolts out and use these ones I have here. And yeah, should be good. And I want to do the upper control arm now because you need to do that before you get the shock up here in this area. And the shock's going to be my next step, kind of simultaneously with the CV axle, but we'll get there when we get there. All right, upper control arm first. All right, the Raptor upper control arm is in place and kind of like pushed up out of the way. That'll make it easier for when I'm installing the shock. But one thing I want to do before installing the shock was getting the CV axle at least started by putting the differential side in. So the plan is I'll obviously take the tape off, put the CV axle in the differential, and I will kind of let it flop out of the way. That way it's easy to get in without the shock there. And then I'll start working on the shock and obviously put the other half of the CV axle in when I can get everything kind of thrown together. So, all right, bear with me, and we'll get the shock in eventually. All right, I got the CV axle in. It went in pretty well. Just a few hits into the differential, and when I say hits, I mean kind of like a shove with my hand, and it went in just fine. So now I'm going to try to attack the shock and kind of talk about that. I bought these shocks from a guy in San Diego and had them rebuilt here in Utah. And so what I had them do is I had them set it up for Mid-Perch. And so in case you didn't know, the Raptor, the Gen 1 Raptors at least, come with 3 grooves cut out so you can adjust your ride height. And the bottom groove here is like stock or OEM level ride height. The one I'm on is mid, and then the final one, which you can't really see, is called top. So one thing, I thought this was kind of like a silly thing to do at first, but one thing I learned is that the Raptor only has so much travel capability in its, not just the shock. The shock's not the limiting factor, it's the CV axle. So that basically limits your down travel only so far. So I thought it was kind of silly when you were adjusting to mid-perch, like, oh, you're losing down travel. I mean, obviously your overall travel is going to stay the same, but you're going to lose relative down travel. So I was like, oh, why don't you just leave it on OEM level, the stock ride height, and then add a spacer on top, onto the top hat there. But that's going to push the down travel further than the CV axle can handle. So if you want to make your Raptor taller, well, in the front, this is the way to do it. And it's not just about height. The shot guy down in here in Utah, he recommends on all his Raptors, he does, to go mid-perch just for ride handling characteristics as well as ground clearance. So that's that. The next thing is I found, and I'm no expert, this is the first time I'm doing this, I'm pretty sure the shocks are side dependent. I was trying to put it in on the other side and things were not happy. These studs are set up in a way where you can only put them in really one way correctly. And so while we're talking about this, you can see the ring up here, and this is called a shim, or like on the Raptor, it's called a shim. And let me orient you. So I have a Schrader valve here that was installed by the shock guy, Desert Speed Shock and Tuning, while I keep talking about them. And you might have like a little like cap here or something, but they install these just for easier service and adjustability. But this is going to be the outside of the shock, closer to the outside of the vehicle. It's closer to me at the moment. And so basically, you have to use two shims while you install the shock. The bottom shim here rests against the top hat and under the shock tower, so it'll be inside here. The top shim goes on top of the shock tower up here, but orientation on these is pretty important. So you want the fat, thick part over here towards the inside of the vehicle. So again, here's the Schrader valve, the outside of the shock, and here is the thin part here and the fat part that'll go towards the back. And so then you want the top shim that'll be on the top hat to go opposite, like so. I believe it's like this. Yeah, like that. And so what that does, seems kind of silly, but what that does is that gives you a flush mounting point to secure your fasteners here. So that way there's no weird angles. And I think that what this achieves is it pushes the shock out a little bit on more of an angle towards the outside of the vehicle, just for whatever suspension geometry, but that's what you got to do to make this all fit correctly. So I'm going to try to get it in place, and hopefully I told you everything that was correct there, and if not, I will address it, and let's do it. All right, as you can see, the shock is, well, at least partially in. So I just wanted to kind of show you guys for more clarification. As you can see, this shim here, it's fatter on the front side and thin in the back as it thins down over there. And so the only way to make that all work is if it's opposite of the one that's down below the shock mount here. So the shock's in, and now it's just time to get the rest of this buttoned up. Next thing will be the four-wheel drive actuator. It's sitting right there on top of that hub. So I'll show you how I'm going to prep that, and then we'll get it slapped in. All right, so here's the four-wheel drive actuator, or as some people call it, IWE. And basically, this slaps right into the Raptor knuckle. However, as you can probably tell, there's some crud in there just from 90,000 miles on the truck. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some shop towels, and I'm going to basically wipe this down, get all the old grease out that I can. Because, you know, I figure if it's already out, you should probably clean it, re-grease it. And what I want to do is probably try to use kind of a similar amount of grease that's already on here, maybe a little bit more, because, you know, some came off on the old CV axle and stuff like that. But so I'm going to take like a mental picture of how much grease is there and try to do a little bit more than that. And so what I'm going to be using is I just played it safe and went with the Ford Motorcraft brand. Yeah, this is the high temperature 4x4 front axle and wheel bearing grease. So this is what I guess you're supposed to use according to the internet. All right, so we're gonna get this cleaned up, put in, and we'll continue the assembly. All right, it's all greased up. Hopefully that's plenty. And we're going to basically just install it with these 3 screws here on this side of the knuckle. And we'll get the CV axle slid in place and start bolting this all up. Okay, so I started this awkward dance of trying to get the shock in along with the CV axle at the same time. I'm using a jack here to kind of control the height. The shock is currently getting hung up. I think a little rubber mallet, I should be able to get that popped in there just fine. And then once that's in place, I'll be able to pivot the knuckle up, get it into the, well, towards upper control arm, and that'll help seat the CV axle into the knuckle there. So I'm gonna work on that and let you know if it worked. Okay, shock is fully installed. Just a couple notes. You're gonna need some really big sockets to take care of this. So this side's a 27 for the bolt head on the lower shock bolt here. I don't even know what the nut is, which is, I know it's dark, so I apologize, in here where my finger is. So I basically took a crescent wrench, put in this slot from behind, and used my impact and in the 27 on this side to tighten it up. When I get this thing aligned, because you know that's not something I feel comfortable doing myself, I'm going to ask them to tighten up that bolt specifically, because I think the torque spec on that is like something crazy, like 400 foot-pounds or something. Don't quote me, but I know it's high. So yep, the shock is fully installed, so that's nice. Not too bad. And now to get this in simultaneously while attaching the upper control arm to the top of the knuckle here. So again, kind of a bit of a dance, but not too bad. It's really just, I mean, it's standard, you know, independent front suspension. Nothing too crazy. All right, it's really starting to come together now. Now I just got to really get the hub and rotor on. The hub still attached to the rotor there. Again, that's a future problem, but not today. So we got the hub and rotor on. It's easy. It's just these 4 bolts here. That's really, you know, for the rotor really. And then we'll get the brake caliper on, which is just, I believe, yeah, these two big bolts here. So I'll get that going, and then I'll show you what I got going on for brake lines. All right, just one thing I wanted to mention before I went too far is don't forget to put your wheel speed sensor back in to the hub here. I did that when I did the passenger side, and it was a painful experience. I had to take the brake caliper back off and reattach it, because you really can't access it once it's on the knuckle because the dust shield here. As far as the wheel speed sensor and the cable assembly, so when I was researching parts from Ford, or you know, on Tasca Parts or whatever, the part number for the Raptor and just the normal F-150 wheel speed sensor are exactly the same. So that means it's the same length, and I'll make sure I have the routing correct, so that way there's no tension or anything like that. So I'll show you any adjustments I make up to the attachment points as we go. All right, the rotor and calipers are on. Basically, the whole driver's side suspension is done. As you might notice, the sway bars in the background, I'll take care of that in a second. But I just wanted to finish basically this side, and I want to talk about some hoses, cables, and stuff. So we already talked about the wheel speed sensor here. I'll take care of that in a second. I went ahead and bought a new Raptor 4-wheel drive vacuum hose. I installed this, and I'll run that clip now. Okay, so before we start putting the suspension components in, one thing I am going to do, I am going to replace the vacuum limes for the 4-wheel drive actuator. The vacuum limes basically go from this side to the other side and up to here somewhere. I've still got to figure that out. It shouldn't be too bad. You can like split these and splice them and make them longer, or I also think you could probably get away with if you unclip some things up here, you get a lot of slack. So that could work, but I just didn't want to take the chance of my four-wheel drive failing, or I guess it would fail on, so not a big deal. But I figured the harness, the new, I guess, vacuum hoses, the hose harness, or whatever you want to call it, assembly. It's not that expensive. I think it was like 50 bucks off Tasca. Here's the part number. So I'm going to essentially trace the lines and replace it as I go, unclip all the old connections and clip the new ones in. So I think it should be a pretty easy process, and I'll give any updates for anything important. All right, replacement of the vacuum lines was super easy. I really just traced all the way through. Yeah, and I guess just the one thing to note is the little 90 here connects right onto, I guess this is the vacuum pump, I think. I'm no expert, but I'm sure someone in the comments knows. Anyway, so this little 90 plugs in right here, and then you just follow the breadcrumbs and replace it, so not too bad. But basically this thing, once the Raptor one clips right on up here, like it was made for it. This one goes over here on the side, super easy. And finally the hose will plug in to the hub back here, like so. Sits on there. All right. So the only other thing that didn't really match up for me was this little clip here. On the passenger side, I just cut this off. So I think it's plenty secured to the knuckle here. And then we'll move on to brakes. All right, so while you can definitely go with the standard Raptor brake lines, they're more than enough, more than fine. I ended up, because I was putting on longer brake lines for the rear axle, I just decided to buy them in a kit, because that's, that's how you buy them. It's a full set, front and rear. So this is from SDHQ. It's stainless steel, so allegedly that offers better braking performance and better brake pedal feel. So we'll see how that does. But essentially, this kit comes with some clips that allow it to clip in a similar fashion over here. So we'll get this in and we'll wrap up this driver's side. All right, the brake lines are ran. I was having a little bit of trouble with this top fitting up here. I was having a hard time lining it up, but here's this clip that SDHQ supplies, which I utilized with the factory hole there, and also put the four-wheel drive sensor through the same bolt. Then I kind of just went through and I zip tied the wheel speed sensor to the brake line, basically all the way up. I think it's a good look. I don't really know what Ford had intended for all those random clips that were on these kind of like rubber pad things, but all good. So obviously I'm gonna have to bleed the brakes and get those filled back up and start with that. I'll get the sway bar on, which is just 4 bolts. Well, correction, 4 bolts to mount it to the body, and then one nut on each side, which lines up right here on the lower control arm. So simple enough, and I think that's about it. All right, here it is with the suspension done. It's definitely looking mean. Get a front angle here. So looking super wide. I guess athletic is also the word I would use. So I just got it back from the alignment shop, and I just wanted to give you the alignment specs that I requested to be totally upfront. They weren't able to achieve these specs, but I'll read the specs that came off of the Ford Raptor form that everyone seems to praise. So a caster of positive 4.0 to 4.3, camber of negative 0.3 to negative 0.2, and total toe of positive 0.2 to positive 0.25. So they were having some hard time getting that, and I don't know if that's because of the cam bolt kit here. I don't know when I welded on the doubler kit if it kind of restricted motion or adjustment in one way or the other, but I drove a little bit of a test drive on the way home from the dealer where I got it aligned and seemed to be driving okay. And then I went through and threw on the sway bar. Just one thing to note, if you are going to do this, I would just leave the sway bar off when you go to get it aligned, because to adjust those bolts, to get a tool in there, or a ratchet or whatever, you're going to have the sway bar off. So I just left it off and threw it on now. Overall, I haven't really done any significant driving with it, so it's hard to give first impressions. Without the alignment, it was definitely super darty and all over the road, but I think that's to be expected. So I know I'm going to have to trim this tube here, the tube bumper, and get that to fit with the profile. It's probably going to end up being a little stubby, but get that to fit with the profile of the new fenders. But one actual concern I do have, and it's hard to say, but I'm worried about the sway bar here hitting this brake line bracket. You know, I guess there's a chance where it rotates and doesn't hit, but it looks really close to me. So I'm just going to keep an eye on that and obviously try to be careful. I tried to flex the truck a little bit and see how close it would get, but I couldn't really flex it enough for it to get close. So we'll see. Hopefully a hard hit doesn't knock the brake lines out, because that'd be pretty rough. All right, we'll do the price breakdown real quick, just so you guys are following along. So again, I broke this up into required costs and optional costs. In the last video, I forgot to talk about the pricing of the cam kit and the doubler kit. So I'll throw that in the optional costs today. So we'll start with the required costs. So I'm totaling the front suspension around $400, and that's including travel costs for me to go get it from that package deal in Texas. The shocks I got from the guy in San Diego with shipping, about $388. The rebuild from Desert Speed Shock and Tuning was $474, including shipping to get them back here. The four-wheel drive actuator vacuum hose, $53, and consumables like brake fluid, those clamps for the tie rods, and stuff like that, totaling $87. So the required cost for the front end, I have a total of $1,402. Going over the optional costs, the stainless steel brake lines from SDHQ were $198. Custom valving from Desert Speed Shock and Tuning was $60. And then the doubler kit, $54. And then the cam kit, $185. So the total optional cost is just under $500 at $497. So that puts me at a grand total of $1,899 for all of the stuff I've done, including like shipping, which has been ridiculous. All right, if you made it this far, hopefully you found this video useful. And if you're trying to do this yourself, hopefully this gave you a pretty good idea on how to do it, and just like the general process and how the Raptor suspension works. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to answer. And coming up next are, let's see, fenders for sure, and then eventually fiberglass. So, all right, come back and see how it looks next time.